أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
What's the difference between Hafs and Warsh? And this is a technical question. These are two different recitations. So we know that the Quran came down, was revealed on 7 ahruf. And harf is side. And some explain it as an accent. So it's a different structure of the word with different meanings that do not go against one another, but rather they go in the same channel, giving additional meaning to the word itself.
You've got to look at this objectively with a sound mind. The statement was made that the verse being read, which is Surah 3 verse 146, adds a new dimension to it. But check it. The very first ayat or verse he read was from a Quran that is known as the Warsh Quran. Now, that Quran is in places like West Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, parts of Sudan. All right? Nigeria is a place that specifically has this particular Quran. The people in those countries, that particular verse was the first one you heard, all right? Where it says Qutila, the deeper sounding one, right? And it translates as, and how many a prophet were killed, and with him fought many religious scholars. It uses the word Qutila for the word killed, that prophets were killed. Now, if you are in England, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, and most places of the world where 95% of the world's Muslim use not the Warsh Quran, use a different Arabic Quran known as the Hafs, that word is qatal, but it reads how many of the prophets fought in Allah's way. Now, somebody on the English, Saudi Arabian, America, Turkish, Iranian, Pakistan's side of the world would say that verse is talking about prophets who fought in Allah's cause. Fought can be taken two ways. It can be taken those who fought and still remained alive, and those who fought who were killed. The implication here is quite simple. The people on the African side, the side of Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, they strictly have it that prophets were killed. And we know through history not all prophets were killed in their battle of proclaiming the Most High. These verses are saying different things. Somebody in Africa doesn't know of the Hafs Quran. Shabir Ali made a point, if you listen keenly, he said that Muslims are not expected to know everything in their one Quran, but if they read other Qurans, they'll get the better picture. What kind of statement is that when you're now saying that you'd have to read different Qurans to get the overall picture of one verse? Conveniently, you don't say how many Qurans you'd have to read. And he says you'd have to read the translation, the tafsir. How does that make sense? If I'm reading a straight out verse, I don't need to read the tafsir to explain the verse, because the Quran itself said it's a book that is clear with guidance without doubt. So in order to explain these verses, you'd have to read other Qurans that have the verses in different ways, expressed differently, to get the overall picture. You can see that's utter madness. And what that's being said really is to cover up the fact that you have mistranslated and corrupt Qurans throughout the world. And they've used the word ahruf to cover up this lie. That's not the only reason. There's also a spiritual reason. But one of the reasons how you cover it up is by saying, somebody says, there's a different Arabic Quran. It says killed in this one, and this one says fought. They said, that's another layer of the Quran. It gives it a richer meaning, as you heard. No, because if you are in your town, your city, your area, you only know of that verse. So it means what it means according to what you've read. And some of a different Quran has that meaning. So this would obviously mean the world of Islam is in confusion because of the fact that they don't realize that Muslims weren't taught about, obviously, the corruption of their Quran and why there's different statements being made. They don't realize that the Quran was corrupted. And that's what the fallout was from Hatun Tash, who started collecting, that's Christian woman, started collecting different Qurans from the Middle East and Africa.
The Quran you recite in Kosovo, which one is that?
Kosovo? What do you mean the Quran? You recite one Quran in Arabic.
Okay, so the reason I asked that is, this is another Quran, I bought it in Morocco. Okay, this is the Quran, I bought it in UK.
And start seeing these so-called variations, and some of the variations are obviously mistakes, like here. Because if I will say it again, if you're in your town reading this particular Quran, that's what it means to you. It means killed. Prophets were killed. If you're on the other side of town and didn't know of that Quran, the statement means the prophets fought. So you can see there's confusion here and a lie being perpetrated of the teachings of Aruf to say, oh, these are different Arufs. No, those are mistakes, clear mistakes. There's also one of the speculations of the Aruf, right? And this is kind of interesting because they're saying that the actual Aruf came about from Yathrib. Yathrib is the other name, or original name or word for Medina, because one of the hadiths on the seven Aruf talks about Ubay being, or Muhammad talking to Ubay, and Muhammad is on the outskirts of Medina. Well, you can throw that notion out, right? Because of the fact that, and the reason, let me just go back a bit. The reason why they've come to that conclusion, some people came to that conclusion, is because most of the Meccan tribes were the same, predominantly Quraysh. But when the doctrine got over to Medina now, right, and why they made this up is because now you get different or variations of tribes. So then you can say, oh, okay, the seven Afruf came about through the seven tribes in Medina because there's more tribes there. So you're trying to link the Afruf to it beginning in Medina, but yet you remember Muhammad's going back and forth before the Quran is revealed to him to say, you know what, we need different modes. Or they allege Muhammad went back and forth with Jibreel to say we need different dialects being sent to us because, you know, they can't handle it in my Quraysh dialect. The people cannot handle it. The people cannot handle it. So look what's being said here. Allah didn't know before he sent Jibreel that one dialect of the Quraysh wouldn't be enough. He didn't estimate, examine and say, you know what, that's all what's needed, man. They can learn that dialect. They all speak Arabic, but they've got to learn that one. He didn't know that. That's what you're saying. You put Muhammad in that position to then be battling and questioning Allah's wisdom. And he beat Allah. You know why he beat Allah? Because he changed Allah's mind. He changed Jibreel's mind from revealing in the Quraysh, according to you, to 7 dialects. But even that is confusion because you can't name what the dialects are because it didn't happen, it didn't exist. Then you go into more technical foolishness because of the fact that if you're talking about changes in many of the verses, right, and there's over 6,000 in the Quran, that means there will be tens of thousands of changes in the verses. Are you saying that Gabriel read every single one of these Aruf to Muhammad? That's what you're saying there. That's tens of thousands of verses that he had to recite to Gabriel, right? He had to recite to Muhammad, I should say. Tens of thousands of variation, differences in grammar. You're talking about plural, plurality to singular, to masculine or feminine, to masculine, to order of words. You're talking about synonyms. All these changes would have amount to tens of thousands of recitations that Jibril had to orally give to Muhammad and then check his pronunciation before he even writes it down. Are you saying Jibril did that? Are you saying an illiterate prophet did that? Because now you have a problem now. You know where you have the problem? Because you teach that Muhammad was illiterate. Where is the evidence that Muhammad knew any dialect other than the Quraysh? I'll wait. There's none. None. And if you want to tie it down to 7 afruf, that means there's 6 sets of words that encompass synonym variants, masculine and feminine changes, plural and single changes, additional words in verses, words omitted, order of arrangement changes, right, and pronunciation changes. All of this was in 6 other afruf, other than the Quraysh one. Did Gabriel really do all of this? Did Allah really send down this? Did Muhammad learn all of this? No evidence of any of it. And if you take it to a simplistic notion, the tribes would have been really appreciated for him just enabling the Quran to be in their particular dialect or their particular mode of speech. Where is the hadiths from any of those tribes, they listed 7, where they're saying, thank you, Muhammad, you made things easier? There's no evidence of it. None whatsoever.
Alhamdulillah.
You go on to other realities or technicalities. Well, if Muhammad wrote on what? Bones and skin in the Quraysh dialect, where's the bones and skin of the Afruf? Where are they? So after all this work, he never got tired as well, because he's not just dealing with one dialect and learning an illiterate prophet learning the dialect of the Quran. He's got 6 layers to do, 6 sets. He didn't get tired. He didn't make mistakes. Where is the documentation on this? No evidence whatsoever. You just mention the 7 afruf and that's the end of that. It's easily seen through. Child's play, simple, silly stories. Where's the oral glorification from the tribes who said, thank you, Muhammad? There would have been all of the tribes who got their afruf saying, thank you so much. You made life so much easier. Like the Quran in Surah 44 verse 58 makes a point of saying, we made it easier in your tongue. How come the Quran doesn't say that about the afruf? Why? Because it didn't exist. They say, and this is the premier teachings or the consensus, and I'll play it first before I break it down. This is from Abdul Rahman Hassan.
Uthman sent 5 masahif. Those 5 masahif Uthman radiallahu anhu sent, it consists in there, or it has, or it contains, those 5 masahif that he sent, the last version of the Quran from the 7 ahruf. The final version of the Quran, al-ardatul akhira, the final version of the Quran that was given to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam before the Prophet passed away sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the last Ramadan. Jibreel gave the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the last version of the Quran. Uthman radiallahu anhu, what he did was that final version of the Quran, he spread the ahruf in the 5 masahif. So here you have a mushaf that contains something that the other one doesn't. All of that was to accommodate for the ahruf. One mushaf doesn't have all of the ahruf in it. But the ahruf, the ahruf, the 7 ahruf, that was the final version, the final version, is spread in the 5 masahif of Uthman radiallahu anhu. I hope I haven't confused you guys and that you understood what I'm trying to say. This view is the view of the Jumhur, the overwhelming majority of the scholars.
Well, you heard it there. The overwhelming view of the scholars, and you're talking about not the ordinary scholars, you're talking about the experts, is that the Quran was revealed in 7 ahruf, and these ahruf were in Uthman's copy, and when Uthman sent out the copy to 5 regions, he took from the copy the 7 ahruf and spread it a portion of the ahruf in each. So the 7 was divided into 1 copy, 2 copies, 3 copies, 4 copies, 5 copies, was sent out to the 5 regions, and that's how the ahruf lives on today. The reason why they say that's how it happened is because they're saying Uthman's copy goes back to Muhammad, and upon the last revelation that Muhammad received from Jibreel, he received the ahruf in that revelation. That revelation became the copy that Abu Bakr first wrote down by way of Muhammad's personal assistant, Zayd ibn Thabit. And that was the copy that was used by Uthman to unite the tribes, because they were having differences in the Quran, saying my recitation, because of the ahruf, my recitation is better than your recitation. And they're saying, because there were differences where they were saying that in Syria, the people there were following Ubay's recitation. And in another location, you have those who are following Musad or Musud's recitation. And what that means is the fact that in different locations, you have people who had different ahruf. And then it came to a point that the people of Syria and the local countries were fighting amongst themselves. Really? This is what they say happened. This is the overwhelming consensus of the scholars. The question is this: where is there mention of the 7 ahruf by any of the key people they're talking about? Let me explain that some more. If they're saying the ahruf was in the last revelation that was given to Muhammad because he received it twice in the year that he died, where does it say the word 7 ahruf in that last revelation in any hadith? It doesn't exist. More importantly, I would say is this: the person who wrote down was his personal scribe, another astute, not the number 1, but a memorizer, expert, Quranic expert, was Zayd ibn Thabit. Where is his documentation and mention of the 7 ahruf if he's the one who scribed it for Abu Bakr? They collected the bones and the skin and then put it onto paper. That was done by Zayd ibn Thabit on command of Abu Bakr. Where's the evidence that Zayd ibn Thabit knew of the 7 ahruf? Where's the evidence that Abu Bakr mentioned about the 7 ahruf being in there? That doesn't make any sense. Then they say that a copy 20 years later, because that's taking place in 632 to 634 on Muhammad's death, 20 years later in 652, right? You have a problem where the tribes are arguing, right? Or the Muslim Ummah, the community of Muslims, are having differences and boasting about their particular Quran. they're saying these differences come from the Afruf. Where does Uthman say that? It sounds authentic until you strip it and peel it apart. Uthman doesn't say that. Again, more importantly, the person who writes that Quran down from the original Quran is again Zayd ibn Thabit. Where does he talk about the 7 Aruf? It's not there. We go further, strip it down, break it down. Well, if the most fervent, passionate Quran teacher, expert, who's on a par with Masood, those two are experts. Masood is in Iraq, right? Apparently his teaching got him into Iraq, that's an Afruf. Ubayd went to Syria, that's an Afruf. Their followers are fighting, and this is why Uthman's like, you know what? He's told you need to do something about it, because we don't want to fall like the Jews who are differing about their books. So you know what? Bring it back to the Quraysh, so everybody's going from the Quraysh. The point being, if Ubayd is so passionate, so knowledgeable, so fervent, and taught people, the Syrians, right? Where is the evidence that Ubayd mentioned the 7 Afruf? There's none. Wouldn't Ubayd, knowing there's a conflict between his followers, right, and his fellow Sahaba companions' followers in Kufa, Iraq, that was the ancient name for a portion of Iraq called Kufa. So this is happening in Iraq and Syria. The two are literally cussing and warring against each other of my Quran is better than your Quran, my recitation is better than your recitation, my singing Qira'at is better than your Qira'at, not my Akhruf is better than your Aruf. There's no mention by Ubayd, who dies 3 years before this unified Quran of Uthman comes out. He dies in 649, Uthman's Quran comes out in 652. Why didn't Ubayd mention anything about this argument? That would have broken his heart. He had all those years to mention it, to talk about these differences and help remedy the problem. There's no documentation about Ubayd talking about that it's the 7 Afruf what caused the problem. He doesn't mention it, but you do. Likewise, Masood, who dies 1 year after that Quran comes out by Uthman, he doesn't mention anything about the 7 Aruf causing difference between the followers who paid attention to his Afruf and the ones who paid attention in Syria to Ubayd's Afruf. None of them mention about this difference. This would have been a major event. And up and above the most, if they learn from these masters, because Masood is on a parallel of Ubayd. Ubayd gets the credit, but they're really all on one, because Muhammad says there's 4 of them they should learn from, right? But Ubayd gets all the credit. All right, it doesn't matter if you rank them 1, 2, 3, and 4, or they're all equal. The point being, these are the masters or expressors of right Islamic living, right Quran recitation, right teachings. Come on now. Those men don't make the mistakes like that. They're not going to have their teachings disrespected and the people go off and not say nothing about it, let alone it happen. And if it did happen, there's no evidence of it. So what you heard in the breakdown from Abdul Rahman Hassan is that when Uthman did this Quran, right, he took, now listen, they took from Uthman's Quran, right, think about it, and they took out the 7 Afruf and put a portions of each in all 5, right, and that means they don't cross each other. So Quran 1 Uthman doesn't have the same Afruf as Quran 2 Uthman, because they're all different. They got all these 7 Afruf portions are in the 5. How would you have differences in words all in one Quran? How could you have that? The verse wouldn't make any sense. So no, that didn't happen. But up and above the most, there's no evidence of any of this. There's no mention of any 7 of the Afruf by Ubayd and the differences they were causing that caused a fight between those in Syria who followed his Quran and those in Kufa, Iraq, following Masood's Quran. There's no evidence of it. Masood doesn't say anything, Ubayd doesn't say anything, and even more so, Zayd is the one writing the Quran for both Uthman and 20 years earlier, Abu Bakr, he makes no mention of it. Big oversight in their script. Big oversight in their script. Because you're a liar. So the question would be, what does it all mean? What does it all mean about the Afruf? It didn't exist. So then why are there differences? And that's the ultimate question. And that's the whole point of the class. Why are there differences or variant Qurans? This is quite simple. What happened was, when Uthman was told about the differences in the Quran, a decision was made to standardize the Quran in the correct dialect. And then he burnt as many as he could. But he couldn't burn all of them. It wasn't an official mandate that every single Quran was destroyed. So what would happen is, you'd have Qurans that were copied by hand for human convenience in their own dialect. And then differences would naturally occur and errors would naturally occur, and they just persisted, went on, continued. And then that version got copied, and then that version got copied, and then more differences occurred through the ages. Then you compound that with when a cleanup was ordered some 200 years later to have people recite the Quran or sing the Quran in the 7 and then 10 Qira'at. You had those Qari masters, they create a Quran and some of their students. And then in those Qurans, those would have differences that other people copied to add the differences on top of those. So you have a simple factor of human comfortability come into play. I speak a certain way, so I write the Quran this way. And then in writing it by hand, and that's the key here, it's written by hand, you are prone to human error. That's all what's happened there. So the different Qurans that has been picked up around the world, it's because people just wrote the Quran according to their own dialect and taste and comfortability and convenience. And then along the way, as that Quran got rewrote, differences and errors occurred. Some of them, yes, do indeed go back to the Sahaba, to people like Ubay, to people like Masud. Of course they do. But the question would be, who knows? Who knows which one is which? And an equal, if not a more important question, nobody knows which was the correct one. Because the Quran uses the word, we gave it the Quran in your tongue. It's for you in your tongue to give to the people. Where's that? You heard on the original broadcast by Adnan Rashid that they have the original physical Quran. They don't. They have no complete physical copy with 114 surahs that go back to Muhammad's time. It don't exist. What they've done here, they've used a particular website that makes claim to have all of the Quran. And what they've done is that they've historically recorded the different Qurans that have been found. So if chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 was found in this location, I add it to chapter 8, 9, and 10 that was found in that location. And then you have some that cross over that encompass 1 to 8, some that encompasses 15 chapters, some 20, but never 114. But if I add up all these different Qurans and their chapters, I get 114. And then they say, we have the original Uthman Quran. No, you don't. He never signed it. You don't know what it looks like. You don't know what was said in there. You don't. That's why you have this problem now that when the broadcast went out by way of Muhammad Hajib interviewing Yasir Kadhi, as the expression goes, all hell broke loose because he expressed that, you know, there's holes in the narrative.
every single student of knowledge knows, who studies Ulum al-Quran, that the most difficult topics are ahruf and qira'at, and the concept of ahruf and the reality of ahruf, and the relationship of the Uthmanic Mus'haf with the ahruf, and the preservation of the ahruf. Is it 1, is it 3, is it 7? And the relationship of the qira'at to the ahruf. This issue of ahruf and qira'at has troubled the ummah from the very beginning.
And what he meant by that, there's holes in the narration of how the Quran came about by 7 ahruf and what it means to the qira'at. And you've heard the breakdown today. There is no relationship because the ahruf didn't exist. And you've heard how there's holes in the narrative because you have glaring mistakes where you've got two men who are bickering or arguing, or one drapes up one man to say, you know, what are you doing? I've never heard this style before. Let me bring you to Muhammad. Drape him up, which is not the conduct of a good Muslim anyway. And Muhammad turns around and says, that's okay. He's fine. Then you don't think yourself, how come Umar doesn't say, as a close associate who's married to one of his daughters, his daughters is one of his wives, right? She's Hafsa, who's the one actually they gave her the safekeeping of the Abu Bakr Quran, who then Zayd ibn Afabit had to get that particular Quran to then make the Quran in 652, or the Uthman Quran, right? So you know they must be close. He doesn't even know about the 7 ahruf. He drapes up a man to bring him round. And then Muhammad turns round and says, no, it's okay. How does that make any sense when your closest people, particularly Ubay, they don't even know about those 7 ahruf? How does it make any sense when the ahruf is not even mentioned, most of all, in the Quran itself? Because that's a fundamental critical teaching for how the Quran was supposedly downloaded by Gabriel to Muhammad for the people and made it easier in their tongue for them to read and recite. There's no record of it in the Quran. Why? Because it was made up.